Hi, I'm Sal Mercogliano, Associate Professor of History at Campbell University, a former merchant mariner and an adjunct professor in maritime industry policy at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. And welcome to this episode of What's Going On in the Suez. We're going to need a bigger boat edition. It's April 26, 2021, and I thought I'd fill you in with some details about what's going on with Ever Given right now, and also a very important anniversary that's going on today. So let's go over to our screen here and share what we got going on. So first off, Ever Given. What is going on in the Suez? Well, this is coming out today. Two stories came out today. Suez Canal hopes for deal on detained Ever Given. So one of the things that we know going on in the background here is that the UK P&I Club has appealed the arrest of Ever Given, the $916 million. They're supposed to be heard in court early in May here. But probably in the background is negotiations being made by the UK P&I Club, the owners of Ever Given, the Evergreen company itself, and probably every other container company that goes through the Suez Canal wants this thing resolved as quickly as possible. And the question is, how much money is the Suez Canal Authority going to accept before they release the vessel? Is 916 million their bottom offer, or is there something else that they'll accept? Understand, going through the Suez Canal is one of those events where, you have to be nice and pay at times. There's always an issue here with going through the canal. And so one of the things that we see all the time here is what needs to be done to get you through the canal. I mentioned a story about having a ship detained in the Suez, basically lost its place in the convoy because of not giving the pilot enough gifts and presents, usually cartons of cigarettes. This may be We may be watching this on a larger level right now. The other statement here is by the Suez Canal Authority, and this is on their Facebook page. I follow their Facebook page, and this is the exact statement here. And this is a Google Translate, so I apologize if the statement here is not exact. But again, I'm not fluent in Egyptian or Arabic. The team, Osama Rabah, the chairman of the Suez Canal Authority, confirmed on Monday the commission's effort to succeed the ongoing negotiations with the Panamanian container company Ever Given. It's interesting. They continually mention this, the Panamanians. This is the flag of registry for Ever Given. And one of the reasons I think they're doing this is because there's a lot of Panamanian flags that go through the canal. And I think they're trying to leverage the Panamanians in a way, along with the company, along with the owners of the vessel. And the insurance companies show all possible ways of cooperation to reach the compromise solution suitable for all parties, expressing hope recent talks on a close agreement under the large facilities provided by the authority, and appreciation of extended relations with the ship's owner, and an understanding of the circumstances amid the economic fallout of the novel corona crisis on the shipping industry. Can we just be clear? That's a very long sentence. Just being a history professor and me, that's an extremely long sentence right there to be using. The team Rabbi explained that the body is fully flexible with all the requirements for negotiation and full commitment to what international customs decide in the situation. Chairman of the committee emphasized that there is no validity on what is being circulated about the arrest of the ship's crew. So when people say the arrest of the ship, they're talking about the vessel. The vessel physically is arrested. You can arrest a ship. You don't slap handcuffs on it. You don't do a law and order. But what you're doing is you're making the ship susceptible for the damages done as levied by the Suez Canal. Remember, $316 million for the salvage of the vessel, $300 million for a bonus, and $300 million for disrespecting the canal. That's what the $916 million is. They go on here to talk about explaining that the authority does not prevent the departure of the crew or replace it, but that the sufficient seafarers are available to secure the ship, and in light of continued presence of the ship's captain as a guardian judicial on the ship and its goods. Remember, there was just a story released that the ITF, the International Trade Federation, had to go in and get a Syrian crew member who's been detained on board the ship for 4 years. Since 2017, 4 years he's been detained on that vessel, was just recently released. He was prevented from leaving Egypt because they would not give him a visa. They would not allow him to leave the vessel because he signed paperwork saying that a member of the crew would remain with the vessel, and he was the unlucky guy who got stuck there with that. There's a fear that this could happen again. Now, fortunately, this is not an empty Syrian vessel. This is a fully loaded evergreen vessel with cargo on board that has to be moved. Goes on to here to say, noteworthy that the authority has responded to all the ship's demands made by the owner of the ship regarding the crew, including allowing 2 crew members to leave the ship, return to the country due to personal emergency circumstances. So that's where we stand with Ever Given right now. She is still held in the Great Bitter Lake, sitting there waiting. Obviously, the next thing is going to be the May court date. But behind the scenes, we know there's negotiations going on. We know the UK P&I Club. We know Evergreen. We know that probably the other container companies are going to be involved in this. At least very much Evergreen's alliance is going to be involved, because there's going to be fear that if another ship gets grounded, one of these ultra large container ships, what happens to their vessel? And there's going to be increased charter rates, increased insurance rates, which leads to increased charter rates down the road. And charter rates are already through the roof because of demand for goods and the just availability of vessels. The other thing I want to talk about today was containerization. Today is the 65th anniversary of containerization, the concept developed by Malcolm McLean. And, container ships range in size. We can go to the 1 TEU vessel right there, as depicted on the screen right there. But this is probably inefficient. We're going to need a bigger ship, all the way to the biggest. This is CMA CGM Jacques Saade came into Le Havre today with the largest load ever put on a container ship before. She sailed from Singapore earlier this month. She went through the Suez Canal. She's over 21,000 boxes on board, 21,433 boxes on board. A behemoth of a vessel, just massive in terms of the number of boxes on board. Also LNG powered. She uses LNG power when she's coastwise and inside ports to minimize pollution. She is not fully fueled by LNG. She doesn't run pure on LNG. There's not enough tanks big enough on the vessel for them to run on that. But an extremely massive vessel. And I thought today, just briefly talk about this. This is a video that was put out by an organization, has got a lot of views. And so I'm going to tap into their video here because, again, it's on YouTube, and I'll give them full rights for it. This is the Human Progress video. I'm not going to really play their audio because I think their video is extremely good. I'm not going to play all the video either, but they hit on a couple of key points that I'm going to narrate on as the video plays. And one of the things that they talk about here is how cargo is moved. Cargo is moved by break bulk method for most of history. In other words, you break the cargo down into smaller pieces. So, for example, in this case, drums, barrels, cargo, you name it, just a whole variety of different cargo is being used. And one of the things you see in here in this imagery right here, excuse me, is this cargo being broke down into smaller and smaller pieces. And we see it being done here on this ship. It is a way you do it, and this is referred to as break bulk. So I'll pop out of the video there for a second and show you this. This comes from a official publication by the U.S. Navy on loading ships during World War II. This is a World War II Liberty ship. Liberty ships were mass produced during World War II in the United States. 2,700 plus of these vessels were built, 455 feet long, capable of carrying 10,000 tons of cargo. What I particularly enjoy about this imagery right here, and I have this on my Twitter feed, so if you want to see it in a little more detail on my Twitter feed, you can. But one of the things you see right here is how cargo is loaded into these separate holds, 5 separate holds. You have basically a series of decks. You have the bottom deck and what's called tween decks or between decks on these vessels, and you load them. So, for example, here in the number 5 hatch down here, you have bombs, just bombs, physically loading bombs in the cargo. Now, think about that for a second. Take a room, any size room you have, a large room, small room, whatever, stack it full of goods. But you have to stack it so that the goods cannot shift, because imagine you're on a ship and a ship takes a 45-degree roll. 45-degree roll one side means a 45-degree roll to the other side. That means the room you're in rotates 90 degrees. Just basically take the room and put it on its side. You've got to block and brace cargo so it doesn't move, doesn't shift in there. And not only that, but you have to bring each individual piece down there and individually lock it into place. So this takes a long time. You're talking about days, if not weeks at times, to block and brace vessels. Bombs down here, crates of canned goods down here, lumber, vehicles, put tanks on top of stuff. Well, you got to keep the tank from moving. You got to block and brace that in there. Aircraft parts, you name it, bags of material. This is break bulk. This is what we start talking about when we start talking about break bulk. What containerization does is it prevents this from being done at the site of the loading of the ship, because it's done in the containers. When the containers arrive on port, they're already blocked and braced on the inside. Now all you got to do is stack them in the hold. That is the genius of containerization. It eliminates this. It eliminates the break bulk need. And so instead of having to do this at the dock in the port, now you can do it. And it also makes it much more efficient, because you can be more efficient in the loading of your vessel. let this video go here a little bit. So basically, we've loaded ships for a long time the same exact way. It's not until 1956 with Malcolm McLean that we see this. This is good old Malcolm McLean, born in 1913 in Maxton, North Carolina. I'm in North Carolina, not too far from Maxton, as a matter of fact. And that's the interesting thing. Here's a guy who's a truck driver who revolutionizes shipping, because his focus isn't on the boats, the ships, it's on the cargo, and the cargo is key. This is where military and commercial always diverge, because military likes to look at vessels, look at boats, whereas commercial likes to look at cargo. We need cargo. If you want more ships, we need cargo. This is what McLean comes up with. He owns the 7th largest trucking firm in the United States. And it was during a loading at Red Hook in Brooklyn that he realizes that he needed a more efficient way. He was wasting a lot of time the way they were loading cargo. And he realized that's in 1937. It was it's true. This is early in his career that he witnessed it, but it took him a long time. It took him only 20 years to come up with the solution to this. And his idea was to make this modular container. And the movement of the container was key, to be able to move those boxes on and off, not just trucks, but railways and vessels, and load them on. And this is how you get to containerization today, modern day shipping. 1956, he starts his own shipping company. And in 1956, he sails a ship called the SS Ideal X from Houston, Texas, up to Newark. It's a tanker. It's loaded with fuel, but when it arrives in Newark for the voyage back, it comes back empty. Well, he decides to put what's called this mechano decking, this kind of elevated decking on there, and now you can load it. And now you basically have the concept of containerization. He eventually morphs his vessels into a shipping line called Sealand. Sealand really became one of the biggest container firms in the world until it was subsumed by Maersk Lines. Maersk is now the biggest shipping line, although we had a story talking about the fact that MSC may eclipse them in terms of that. But modern conveniences we have today are generated by Malcolm McLean. We see that here. I'm going to have this entire video available to you. So if you want to hear the narration and watch it in full, you're free to do so. But I want to talk about something else here. And it's an important element here because in some ways, containerization has reached the plateau for what we can do with it. This is the SS Ideal X. This is from Jean-Paul Rodrigues' site, The Geography of Transport Systems, which I believe everyone should take a look at. I think it's great. He talks about this, but the key thing that McLean hit on in 1956 was this stat right here. Loading a medium-sized ship the conventional way costs $5.83 a ton. That's because of longshoremen, the time on berth, and the occupation of the vessel for such a long period of time. Comparatively, loading the Ideal X would cost 16 cents a ton. You want to talk about a dramatic drop. That's a dramatic drop. The advantages there are tremendous right off the bat. The advantages there are just absolutely tremendous. And one of the concepts that Malcolm McLean had was you would be able to load these boxes. His initial boxes were 35 foot long boxes. Now today they're standardized at 20 and 40 foot. The concept, the problem right now is that not everybody has things that need to go into a 20 foot or a 40 foot container. A lot of people have less than container loads. And so what you do is you get freight consolidators, freight forwarders, NVOCs, non-vessel operator container carriers, and you load it. So, I want to load tennis balls. I want to load a container full of tennis balls, but I don't have enough tennis balls to load in a 20 or a 40 foot container. I don't want to pay for empty space. So I get somebody to consolidate that, put more goods into that container. And it's much more efficient to put in a 40 foot than a 20 foot. So my goods may be shared in a container with a whole batch of other goods. But what that means is I have got to ship my goods to that freight forwarder. They have to consolidate it, pack it into a container. That container has to be sent to a terminal. That terminal has to be loaded onto a ship, but it may be loaded on a smaller ship because my port may not be big enough to get these big vessels in. So it may be moved in another port onto a larger vessel. Then the reverse is true on the backside. And that's what we start seeing here with containerization. Again, I recommend go to chapter 5.6 here on intermodal transportation and containerization. That's where I get these charts from to talk about it. So, what's the advantages of containerization? Well, lower freight costs, lower insurance costs, minimal load unit. In other words, you can ship anything doesn't matter the amount or volume there. Low storage costs, low packing, faster inventory turnover, much more reliability, much higher frequency of things. You get all those advantages right there. But we don't talk about the disadvantages. And I think that's the problem we start to see here. Let me see if I can maximize this a little bit more for you so you can see. There you go. So we talk a lot about the advantages right here, and a lot of those advantages I just highlighted to you. But let's talk about some of the drawbacks here. Site constraints. One of the things you have is terminals need big, huge areas, especially as the container ships get bigger. I need a lot of laydown area. I need to be able to put down 5, 6, 10, 12, 18,000 boxes from a single ship at a time. That requires a lot of space, and space takes a lot of money. This is what Long Beach and Los Angeles are encountering. Capital incentives. Man, I need container handling facilities. As these ships get bigger, my port may need to be dredged, may need to raise a bridge as they did in Bayonne. It takes a lot. There's a huge capital investment, not the least of which I got to buy containers. And I can't just have one container because I need to keep those containers moving. So I need a slew of containers to keep containers in motion. Stacking. Well, this gets complexity of movement. I need container cranes. I need, not just forklifts to move a container. I may be able to stack them. If I don't have horizontal space, land space, I need to go vertical. So that means stacking. I need repositioning. I may need to remove containers around. This is the idea. A lot of containers that come into the United States are 40-foot containers. But if you look around on the highways, you see 53-foot containers. Well, you need to take those 40-foot containers and repack them into 53-foot because it's more economical to put bigger trucks on the highway. If you got to go from Los Angeles, Long Beach to Denver, Colorado, for example, you don't want to haul 3 40-foot containers. It's much more economical to haul 2 53-foot containers, but those need to be packed. Theft and loss. This is an interesting thing because one of the issues we had initially with breakbulk was theft and loss. People would sticky fingers, longshoremen, stevedores would take stuff. Now, the problem with theft and loss isn't 1 or 2 things missing, but an entire container being stolen, and which magnifies your loss. And then the other is illicit trade. Very hard to do inspection on containers. Now, all containers are screened. The paperwork has to be presented in the port of embarkation and debarkation. So in the United States, the U.S. Coast Guard, CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, INS, will all look at the screening. And if they have a suspicion, they can flag that container for further screening. That may involve an X-ray machine, pulling it through to see what's actually inside a container. That is expensive. It is time consuming, and you have to do them individually, the containers. Now, there's also an issue with damage to a container. Large X-rays could damage components in there. And not every container goes through that. And the worst thing to do is actually to physically open a container and take the contents out. That's the worst. That's very rarely done, a very, very low percentage, single digit low. I mean, 1 to 3% maybe, or you're talking about ever physically opening a container and looking inside. And again, this creates the illicit trade of goods, drugs, weapons, and even illegal immigration. Where we see illegal immigration tends to be in short hauls, but like from Africa to Europe. Not so much trans-Pacific because those containers are in transit for such a long period of time, over a month usually at a time. And putting people in a container is obviously dangerous, but more importantly, you don't get a lot of people in the container because they don't have enough food, water, and more importantly, waste to get rid of. I mean, so again, if you get a stinky, smelly container, you're going to know. And again, just a visual inspection. I got a lot of people asking me about, well, hasn't Ever Gibbons containers been inspected? No, there's 15,000 boxes on board. They're stacked 21 high. Even opening the doors, even if you rappel off the top of the stacks to open up a door, all you're seeing is the back end of a container, which is, if you're doing illegal, transportation of anything, is going to be full of boxes that you can't get off because they're wrapped in pallets. And you're not going to be able to get a pallet load of material off when you're 8 stacks high, for example, or 12 stacks high in the hold. Just not going to be done. And again, this is what makes this so unique. The problem we have, we're actually at a pivot point here, I would argue, regarding containerization. We've actually reached the point where we're too big. Try to get back out of this right now. Let's see if I can get out of this here and get back onto our container. So I'll leave it on. But one of the things we're at right now is this key kind of inflection point in containerization. We're actually getting too big. The benefits that Malcolm McLean had in 1956 with the SSI DLX was, minimize that, cotton bales, that's what the things he was thinking about that you put in there that's easy to move, bulk material. The problem is we move a lot of specialized equipment now. We move a lot of small goods. You want to send your car overseas, you don't need a whole 40-foot container. You got to pack it with somebody else. And what we're doing now is getting so large, so big that we're getting those additional costs. It's getting more expensive to haul goods. And more importantly, it's taking longer to do it. And so we're seeing the flip side of containerization. And in many ways, Ever Given is a good example of that. These ultra large container ships are now pushing us to the extreme. 65 years later, we're maybe reaching the max size. Now, that doesn't mean we don't come up with a technical innovation now that makes moving containers even more efficient. A typical container crane, can move a container, maybe do about 30 moves an hour, about one move, every 2 minutes. When you're dealing with huge, massive vessels and you have limited number of container cranes, that prohibits how fast you can move ships and cargo. So I hope you enjoy this episode of We're going to Need a Bigger Boat, of what's going on in the Suez. Once again, if you enjoy the video, please subscribe. Click the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos coming out. And also give it a thumbs up and a comment. Always appreciate getting comments. Trying to answer them all as quick as I can. Apologize, I'm in the middle of grading exams for the end of the school term. But I'll see you on the next episode of What's Going On in the Suez. Thanks.